The Roman Catholic Church was in the throes of a grave crisis. Pope Benedict had just stepped down, and a desperate search for his successor was on. It led to a city more than 11,000 kilometers away, where fervent faith and tango mix in the torrid summer nights. Thousands of Argentinians crowded into Plaza de Mayo, the theater of the nation's great political moments. On the other side of the world, a momentous religious event was unfolding in St. Peter's Square in Rome. It was the inauguration of Pope Francis, spiritual leader of 1.2 billion Roman Catholics worldwide. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the first non-European to occupy the papal throne in 1300 years, the first Jesuit to become pope, and, as an Argentinian, indeed the first Latin American. It was a turning point in the 2,000-year history of the Church. A month earlier, ominous storm clouds gathered over St. Peter's Square. For the first time in 600 years, a pope had resigned.
Actus plena libertate declaro, me ministerio episcopi Romae, successore Sancti Petri, vi permanens cardinalium, die 11 aprilis bis millesimo quinto commissum, renunciare iter da die 28 February bis millesimo 13.
Well, I turned on the news at 6 in the morning in Chicago on Monday after I had seen him on Thursday. And came back on Sunday to Chicago, and Monday morning I heard on the news that he was resigning. I had a hard time adjusting to it. I couldn't believe it.
Il Santo Padre
The Holy Father is a man who made his choice freely, at a time when he felt he didn't have the strength to serve the Church.
lui sentiva che mancavano le forze per servire la Chiesa.
His act is an act of great courage, great humility, and above all, an act of great love for the Church.
The shocked faithful speculated about why Pope Benedict had resigned. His last year as spiritual leader of Roman Catholics worldwide had been especially challenging, with scandals involving the Vatican Bank and the Vatican government, known as the Curia.
I think he's a sincere and honest man, and that's what he just felt that's what he ought to do. Nobody was influencing him. In fact, I don't think anybody knew. I know the former Cardinal Secretary of State, Cardinal Sedano, only knew the night before. So I think it was a totally free decision.
Gianluigi Nuzzi is the Italian journalist who published papers stolen from Pope Benedict's apartment that spoke of corruption and blackmail in the Vatican. The Pope's butler, Paolo Gabriele, was later found guilty of leaking the papers, then pardoned by Pope Benedict.
In the last year, we have seen two unexpected events regarding people in the Church. One was the papal renunciation, which was unexpected, and another event that was unpredictable was that the butler of this person made these documents public for the good of the Church and the good of the Pope.
One of the scandals involved the Vatican Bank, infamous for its lack of transparency. In early 2012, the bank was investigated for breaking money laundering laws, and its president, Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, forced to resign.
We have a president of the Vatican Bank who resigned because he said, "I'm afraid of being killed." That's what he wrote. He told his secretary, "If I die, give these documents to these three people." And he indicated a journalist, an historian, and a friend.
There were even rumors of a murder plot against the Pope himself. Cardinal Dario Castrillon Hoyos received a report from China predicting Benedict's death within 12 months.
The secret police recorded what was said, and they gave me this document, and I handed it over to the Holy Father personally.
Benedict's greatest challenge was responding to the scandals.
Well, there's no doubt that the child sex scandal remains an open wound, and not just for the Church in the United States, but I think for the Church everywhere. Now, of course, the Church in the United States has been dealing with this for a little longer. You know, our crisis really erupted in late 2002, and so the American Church has been dealing with it for more than a decade, which I think makes our bishops and our cardinals even more sensitive.
The difficulty with the scandals is that every time old history is brought forward, something happened 20 years ago, it happened yesterday. And so people came to think, oh, it's still going on.
Benedict XVI said, "Turn to the civil justice system for..." And we saw how it all ended. I think that in the Los Angeles diocese alone, they paid $650 million in damages to victims.
And it's a terrible scandal. I mean, it should never have happened. And we have to stay with it because we have to stay with the victims. But in terms of handling it, it's not an issue that's been ignored.
Benedict ordered an investigation into the scandals. A report was delivered in December 2012. The mysterious contents of that dossier remain one of Italy's best-kept secrets. The Vatican spokesman, Father Federico Lombardi, informed the media.
The Pope has established that the report will be available to his successor. This, let's say, is the content, and he confirms the fact that the contents of the report have not been revealed to others, so it is known only to those who wrote it and to himself.
Despite chaos in the Curia, Pope Benedict made one last pastoral journey to Latin America, where a third of the globe's Roman Catholics live.
È stato invitato prima.
First, he was invited by Fidel Castro, and then by Raúl Castro. The choice of our country for his visit to Latin America, and as his last journey, is, in itself, very significant.
In se stesso molto significativa.
For him, 85, 86, getting feebler, and he had been with Pope John Paul the last years of his life when really he could do nothing, and there were a lot of cardinals I knew who thought maybe he should resign. You know, after 2000, and I saw him once or twice then, and certainly he wasn't capable of ruling the Church.
Benedict chose to spend the rest of his life here, within the Vatican walls, in this convent specially restored as his new living quarters. As the day of his departure approached, his last appearances did little to lift the veil of mystery over why he stepped down. On the 28th of February 2013, Benedict left the Vatican to take up temporary residence at Castel Gandolfo, the papal summer palace. Cardinal Bertone, the Vatican's Secretary of State and all-powerful administrator, locked and sealed the doors to the pontiff's apartments and declared the throne vacant. The cardinals of the Catholic Church soon descended on Rome to elect a new pope and confront the institution's worst crisis in decades. In Buenos Aires, Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, known for his humble lifestyle, took the metro homewards to prepare for his trip to Rome. The sound of his favorite music filled the air as Argentinians tangoed the night away. unaware that the world's spotlight would soon be turned upon them. Pope Benedict appeared in public for the last time in Castel Gandolfo, where he saluted the crowds before retreating from the Vatican stage.
Padre e Figlio e Spirito Santo. Grazie, buonanotte.
8 years had passed since the death of his predecessor, the charismatic John Paul II.
4 million people, were here. It was just incredible for his funeral, and it was very moving. It was very dramatic, and even the conclave, which sort of followed, was a much quieter affair.
Benedict XVI, a soft-spoken German intellectual, seemed unable to control the powerful lobbies within the Vatican government known as the Curia. Fabrizio Mastrofini is a reporter at Vatican Radio.
Ratzinger came from the Roman Curia before becoming Pope. He had worked there for 20 years, but in the end he proved unable to be fully in control of its inner workings.
As Catholic leaders arrived in Rome, pressure groups soon followed. So did the bookmakers.
Pope betting, let us not forget, goes back 500 years. It's old as the conclave itself. Back in 1513, so 500 years ago, they were betting on the conclave around Leo X. The big banks were running the sort of books between them, and they had sort of minions scurrying between the two with the updated odds. So we're not doing anything new here.
Members of a victims association, the survivors' network of those by priests, also arrived in Rome to make their voices heard.
Until we see the Pope defrocking bad bishops, and until we see the secular justice system jailing bad bishops, then things aren't going to change. And this isn't about being punitive. This is about deterring the cover-ups of child sex crimes.
A remarkably open discussion focused on some thorny issues, such as whether some cardinals in the conclave had covered up. Yet another scandal hit the headlines. Cardinal Keith O'Brien, Archbishop of Edinburgh, resigned after admitting inappropriate sexual behavior towards young priests.
I believe that Cardinal O'Brien has released a declaration on his own behalf in Scotland. At least I see that it is being talked about. This is of another jurisdiction. As far as we are concerned, we have the acceptance by the Holy Father of the resignation of the government of the Diocese of Edinburgh.
The US cardinals broke with tradition and began holding their own press conferences every day after the Congregation of Cardinals. The Curia later asked them to stop. However, the North American College remained a powerhouse for change.
In the old days, the idea was you can't have an American pope because that would be a superpower pope. And, America already has too much power, and everybody would think the CIA had taken control of the Vatican and so on. But, these days, America is no longer the only superpower in the world. The calculus has changed.
Finally, a conclave date was set for March the 12th. As each cardinal is also the parish priest of a church in Rome, they all went to their parishes in the city to say Mass. It was their last campaign push. Austrian Cardinal Christoph Schönborn of Vienna even held his own press conference.
As
St. Francis said, but of course St. Francis did not become Pope. He did not want to. What we're looking for is a man of the gospel. This, I believe, is the deciding question.
On the morning of March the 12th, 180 cardinals celebrated a Mass to pray that all would go well in the conclave about to commence. Under heavy rain and dark skies, 115 cardinal electors, all those under the age of 80, entered the Sistine Chapel to a litany of saints. They swore an oath of secrecy. The doors were ceremoniously closed. 2/3 of the 115 cardinals would have to agree in order to elect a new pope. Speculation over who would get the 77 votes required was feverish.
We'll look at their strengths and their experiences, things like what country they're from, the policy that they've headed up, where they sit in the church, obviously their theological views. Do they have an active Twitter following? It's almost a prerequisite these days. And then from there, we let the market decide.
Archbishop of Milan, Angelo Scola, was the front runner. As Archbishop of the world's largest diocese and former Patriarch of Venice, he was seen as the man who could reform the church from the inside.
Angelo Scola is well known, especially in Italy. He is close to the theology of Joseph Ratzinger.
Scola started off about 15-1 in the betting. He was quickly cut to about 2 or 3 to 1 after we saw a lot of money for him. Take someone like Cardinal Renzi from Nigeria, started off, one of the front runners, 2 to 3 to 1, quickly moved out to sort of 50 to 1 after we didn't see much money on him.
There are many who have pointed to Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, who is this kind of media-savvy freak of nature, as one possibility. Some have talked about Cardinal Sean O'Malley of Boston, who is a profiler on the sexual scandals that have been such a cancer for the Catholic Church.
Those who expected a Latin American pope saw a potential leader in Odilo Scherer, Archbishop of Sao Paulo in Brazil.
It seems that during the congregations before the conclave, Cardinal Scherer defended the workings of the Roman Curia, as opposed to the other cardinals who criticized the Roman Curia.
We hope that the next pope will have Mexico and the whole of Latin America in his heart.
As the faithful and the curious descended on Rome, a circus-like atmosphere permeated St. Peter's Square.
It would be very nice, I think, if the new pope be like Francis I, or Francis, both in name and in his approach, and the things he does, following his teaching.
Inside the conclave, tension was mounting as the ballots came and went.
You'd ask, well, what do you think, etc. So you never ask people how you vote, but who do you think would be a strong, or you ask somebody about somebody else. You do that quite often. You ask a Brazilian, what do you know about Cardinal, Scherer. You ask, I asked Cardinal Kerlich, who's a good friend, who's retired now in Paraná in Argentina, what about Cardinal Bergoglio?
All over the world, men and women prayed for a pope who could address the many different challenges facing the church.
When you reach 77, then you have elected a pope. Whether he'll accept is another question. But that's a moment when everybody, you can just hear a kind of a collective sigh of relief. And people applauded. And then they finished the tally, of course, they must.
I think the election of a pope is extraordinary, it's quick. The death of one pope or the resignation of a pope, within a fortnight, 3 weeks, you've got a new one. It's pretty quick. When you think of elections in countries, they go on and on. In the United States, or indeed in Germany, they're at it for months.
He comes back clothed in white, and then we all listen to the protodeacon of the College of Cardinals facing that great mural of the Last Judgment. When Christ returns in glory to judge the living and the dead, and the Pope is there, and he's listening to the 16th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew, where he hears the words, Jesus telling Peter, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. And only 266 men have ever heard those words directed to them personally.
Finally, white smoke signaled that the cardinals had reached the 2/3 quorum and chosen their man. Bells rang across Rome, and quickly St. Peter's Square filled with a large crowd gathered to hear the news. The protodeacon stepped out onto the balcony to announce the new pope's name in Latin.
Habemus Papa.
Jorge Mario Bergoglio was the Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires and had been the runner-up to Joseph Ratzinger in the previous conclave. It was the first time in 1,000 years that a non-European had been elected as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, and the first time a Jesuit had been elevated to the office. It signaled radical change.
The choice was, I think, one that we took a long time to discern, trying to do what God wants for the church. And sometimes in the reports, people assume motivations based upon geography, where you're from, based upon ideology. But those don't play a large role.
I didn't have in my mind this man, Pope Francis. And I don't think any of the other cardinals, or at least very few of them, did. And it was during the congregations, they call them, the meetings that took place at the cardinals, all the cardinals, for nearly a week. I think that gradually you could see the portrait of someone. And I think it centered eventually on this man they hadn't thought of.
His adopted name, Pope Francis, was inspired by St. Francis of Assisi, defender of the poor and downtrodden. The message to the world was clear. White smoke billowing from a copper chimney was a sign to the world that one of its most powerful leaders had been chosen in the secrecy of the Sistine Chapel. The cardinal's choice fell on Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The enthusiastic crowd celebrated the new pope, even though his election had come as a surprise to all. Carolina Barros is the editor of the Buenos Aires Herald and has followed Cardinal Bergoglio's career.
He didn't expect to be elected pope if you look at the way he bought his ticket. He had a full trip ticket and he was meant to be back on the 23rd. He'll be staying in Rome forever.
The future Pope Francis grew up in this middle-class suburb of Buenos Aires called Flores, more than 11,000 kilometers away from Rome. Now almost completely rebuilt, this is the house where he was brought up by a family of Italian immigrants. Just round the corner is his primary school. Nuestra Señora de la Misericordia was his middle school, and these were the places he played and prayed as a devout Catholic boy.
Here he played football when he was a small boy, 5 years old. When he was bigger, he played football with his friends in the square.
He was a vivacious child, known for his special charm.
There was another sister who died at 110 years of age, and he'd ask, "What was I like when I was a kid?" And she'd answer, "A little devil." The sister was wonderful. She was immensely attached to him.
He was a devout boy, and it is reported that when one of his lungs had to be removed due to a serious infection, he found strength in his faith. He entered the Jesuit seminary aged 20, studied chemistry, and became a priest at 33. The Jesuits are one of the most powerful religious orders in the Catholic Church, and he was appointed their superior in Argentina, aged just 37.
Society of Jesus has been traditionally and a long history very, very politically minded, and they know how to deal with politics and power.
Archbishop Bergoglio worked closely with Father Gustavo Carrara, a Jesuit engaged in frontline missionary work in the slums of Buenos Aires.
The priests, courageous priests, worked in this area during the dictatorship, pushing forward community creation. Today, our work moves forward in the same spirit, although the challenges are very different today, because now these areas are more structured than before, and our idea is how do we integrate these areas into the wider city?
In 1976, a military junta seized power and proceeded to kidnap and murder thousands of people. Among them, those who preached the gospel as a manifesto of social justice. The actions of the Roman Catholic leadership during the so-called Dirty War are the subject of heated criticism, some of it aimed directly at Jorge Bergoglio. As head of the Jesuits in Argentina, he was responsible for 2 priests who were kidnapped in the Bajo Flores slum in Buenos Aires. Their story is intimately connected with the tragic death of Monica Mignone, a devout Catholic teacher and volunteer who worked with them. Mercedes Mignone is her sister.
On the 14th of May, 1976, about 5 in the morning, the bell began ringing insistently. They were from the armed forces. They told Monica to get dressed. They told her not to take any money, that they had come to collect her to answer some questions about a friend of hers, and that 2 hours later she would come back.
Fathers Francisco Jalix and Orlando Jorio were Jesuit priests who worked with Monica. They were kidnapped a week later in the shanty towns where the destitute of Buenos Aires lived and where urban guerrillas found refuge.
Then, more or less a week later, they went to the slum of Bajo Flores, and there they took away 2 priests, Jalix and Jorio, and a group of catechism teachers.
Monica's father was determined to find out what had happened to her. He discovered that she and the priests had been taken to this detention center, the infamous School for Naval Mechanics, or ESMA, where dozens of detainees died under the dictatorship.
When my father found out what the situation was, also with Jalix and Jorio, Montes, who was a member of the military at the time, said, "Oh, but it's the Navy that has them." And a few days later, the 2 priests reappeared. And we think that in this case, in this situation, the fact that our father found out has a lot to do with the fact that they were freed.
Jorge Bergoglio, however, says it was he who intervened with high-ranking Admiral Emilio Macera to have them released. He testified to this effect before an inquest in 2005.
Bueno, mire, Macera, yo quiero que aparezcan. Me levanté y me fui.
What happened to these 2 Jesuit priests, seen here saying Mass with their superior, Bergoglio, is at the heart of the criticism leveled at the new Pope by one of Argentina's leading journalists, Horacio Verbitsky.
This is a document which, in 1979, Bergoglio delivered to the government of the dictatorship asking for the renewal of Jalix's passport. In this second document is the recommendation of the official who received it, rejecting the request.
Although these documents are not signed by Jorge Bergoglio himself, the government official claims that his decision was based on Bergoglio's reports.
In the third document, the same official with the same signature explains what the reasons are, and they are exactly the same as what Jalix and Jorio said Bergoglio was saying about them. Subversive activity in female religious institutes, conflicts of obedience, detainment in the Navy School for Mechanics. They weren't detained, they were kidnapped, which is not the same. He was accused with Father Jorio of suspected contact with guerrillas. These documents were delivered to us by Father Bergoglio himself.
30,000 young men and women were kidnapped, tortured, and murdered during Argentina's Dirty War. Human rights campaigner Emilio Mignone would discover just how ambiguous the church hierarchy was.
This is my mother Angelica Sosa de Mignone and Nora Portiñas, they went to ask the Pope what had happened to their children. But the Church, or rather the hierarchy of the Church, did nothing.
La Iglesia nunca, o sea, la jerarquía de la Iglesia nunca se ocupó.
Shortly after Jorge Bergoglio's election as Pope, Father Jalix released a statement saying he had no further comment on Bergoglio's role in this matter. Some say Bergoglio's silent diplomacy may have actually saved lives, but not everyone is convinced. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo are among his critics. They are still searching for 400 children born in captivity.
Complicity is either by action or by omission. There were those who acted openly and straightforwardly in favor of the dictatorship, such as the bishop, and there are those who looked the other way and did nothing and did not help us, and that was by omission. They have responsibility, because up to this point, Monsignor Bergoglio has said nothing about the desaparecidos.
Monica Mignone never returned. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, meanwhile, have successfully identified 108 grandchildren born in captivity who were placed in foster homes but have since been reintroduced to their biological families.
We estimate that around 30,000 people were kidnapped during the dictatorship, and among them 500 babies, of whom we have found 108. Now they are grown men and women.
108. Ya son hombres y mujeres ahora.
That period when the church would go to the slums, but on the other hand would keep quiet on what was going on, was in a way sent to the archives, and nobody wanted to talk about that. Jorge Mario Bergoglio thinks that the church should be caring of the poor people.
That dedication to the poor is clear here in the very church where Monica Mignone used to work with Fathers Jalix and Giorgio. This is where her sister was married.
The typical inhabitant of this slum is the laborer, the worker, the woman who wants a better life for her children and has to leave them to work outside the home.
The barrio of Bajo Flores is on the southern outskirts of the city. These teenagers are traveling across the city to participate in a special mass for two young men about to enter the local seminary. The celebration is an expression of the fervent popular Catholic culture that thrives here. Many of the inhabitants of the slums are immigrants from neighboring countries, such as Bolivia. They bring with them their own traditions. By engaging with the poor of the slums, the Archbishop Jorge Bergoglio came to know intimately the realities of wider Latin America.
In the barrio on the other side, they hold the very popular feast of the Virgin of Copacabana, who is the patron saint of Bolivia. And here, there are many people who have immigrated from Bolivia. It's a festivity that attracts more than 30,000 people who come from the different areas of the city and Greater Buenos Aires to venerate the image of the Virgin and dance their native dances.
Jorge Bergoglio's opposition to liberation theology won him the favor of Pope John Paul II, who first made him Archbishop of Buenos Aires and then a cardinal.
He's very straightforward, very authentic, a man of great integrity, because he's been pastor when it's been difficult for the church. And so you have to kind of find your way in that. And this is a time of some difficulty for all of us, and so if he can help us find our way, that's one very great help. It will have a big impact on the church and help us all to govern.
Jorge Bergoglio's strong connection with the Jewish community in Argentina may contribute to peace in the Middle East, says Augustin Ulyanovsky, leader of the Jewish youth movement in Buenos Aires.
The Pope can use his charisma and can use the relations he's developed with the Jewish community in Argentina to open a channel of dialogue, to bring an end to this conflict that is so harmful to everyone.
In the earliest hours of March the 19th, 2013, the popular enthusiasm for the first Argentine Pope swept away considerations of the past and the future. Crowds gathered in the Plaza de Mayo. In Rome, thousands massed in St. Peter's Square. The mood was festive. Jorge Bergoglio was about to become the Holy Father of the whole Roman Catholic world. It was the morning of March the 19th, 2013. Thousands were crowded into the Plaza de Mayo to watch the inauguration of the Argentinian Pope in Rome. Less than 3 weeks after his predecessor had resigned, the Roman Catholic Church had a new leader.
I think for non-Catholics or non-believers, there's a certain fascination in this 2,000-year-old institution, which in spite of all the troubles it's had through the centuries, still somehow not only survives, but continues to give that message of good news.
So we have a pope, and that's the most important thing. In our faith, you must have somebody. We've had good popes, bad popes, effective popes, ineffective popes, but you have to have a pope.
As bishop, Jorge Bergoglio was a great communicator, despite not using social media or even a computer.
He doesn't use internet, he doesn't have a laptop. He writes on an old writing machine. He doesn't tweet. But then he knows, and he said it, the importance of the media in this global world.
Pope Francis's quick wit and ability to relate to ordinary people has made him popular.
He's very frugal in his eating, very austere. And they say, if you're invited to dinner, take something with you, or you'll come away hungry.
He has the wit of the people of Buenos Aires. He's open, quick, funny, simpatico, laughs a lot. He's not solemn and not formal. This man's going to have the whole world eating out of his hand.
Despite his old-fashioned style, Pope Francis understands the need for more openness with the media.
He gave the best pieces to the media. He gave it out to the media. And at the same time, he said, look, the moment things were getting very, very dramatic, hot, he said, on my side, I had the Cardinal of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and he said, you shouldn't forget the poor. And so, the Pope says, the name Francis came to me.
The Holy Spirit of God sparked a whole movement, in this case represented by St. Francis of Assisi, which placed the Church in front of the decision to return to the poverty of the Gospel.
All that Francis means not only for the Catholics, but for the whole world. Everybody knows who Francisco de Assis or Francis of Assisi is. And the saint that believed in going back to basics and to nature and the environment.
During his first sermon, on the day of his inauguration in Rome, Pope Francis established the guiding values of his papacy. The Church and humanity, he said, are the custodians of the created universe, and, as such, are called on not only to show brotherly love, but to renew man's ties with nature.
All his first moves were, I'm the Bishop of Buenos Aires one day. It's a big urban church with a lot of challenges. I'm the bishop of this local church, Rome, with all its challenges. I can do this. He knows how to speak to people as a pastor.
Latin America as well is like the nest for populism. The narrative is we belong to the poor, we are doing everything for the poor. So if you have instead a leader that leads 1.2 billion people in the world, this is going to change the way Latin America is going to look at the church once again.
Father Gustavo Carrara, parish priest of Nuestra Señora del Pueblo, likes to think that Pope Francis will embrace the farthest outposts of Christianity as leader of the Catholic Church.
This present Pope used to speak of existential frontiers, by which I mean searching the frontier, which is something that God did. He became incarnate not in the heart of the Roman Empire, but in the farthest reaches, in a small forgotten village that no one had ever heard about.
There's a sort of return to God through Pope Francis, and this has become his mission now. So just as he would go out into the streets here, now he is going out into the world.
He's a great politician. With the church in crisis, there was a need for a great politician to lead it, to avoid the disaster it was going towards.
The church knows. The church has archives. The church has witnesses. We ask them to help us.
Now he's got to make a lot of choices about things he never had to think about much, so he needs the help of our prayer and support and all. He needs a lot of advice. But his biggest strength is, I think, his simple integrity, where, there's nothing manipulative about him or false. And that comes across, and that will give us all courage to govern well, too.
In any case, the truth should never be hidden. The truth does not offend.
The church is about keeping alive the message of Jesus Christ, which is one of love of God and mercy of God, and also giving hope and meaning to people, a hope even beyond the grave. And now people, that's good news if it's preached and witnessed to by a generous and sacrificial life. This Pope, Pope Francis, is a one who I think gives more emphasis to that by his personal witness.
On March the 19th, 2013, Jorge Mario Bergoglio was installed as the 266th Pope and Bishop of Rome. Roman Catholics the world over will remember this day as the beginning of a new era for their 2,000-year-old church, with his powerful message reaching the farthest frontiers of this global faith.